The court of Verelium was quieter than Colin expected, which immediately made him suspicious. Alien courts, in his limited but enthusiastic experience, tended to hum, glow, pulse, or otherwise announce their importance with unnecessary enthusiasm. This one simply breathed. The walls curved inward, like the inside of a colossal shell, translucent panels layered with slow-moving light that reminded him of deep water seen from below. Every sound seemed politely absorbed before it could echo. It was the sort of place that made a man feel overdressed even when he wasn't, which was impressive considering Colin was wearing formal ambassadorial attire that had taken 3 people and 1 very judgmental machine to assemble. He adjusted the collar anyway. Old habits survive stasis. Queen Marveth stood at the far end of the chamber, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence rather than ease. She looked almost human at first glance, which was always the dangerous part. The long ears swept back from her temples in elegant arcs, subtle but unmistakable, their tips adorned with thin metallic bands that caught the light when she moved. Her expression was attentive, sharp-eyed, and faintly amused, as if she were watching a performance she had already seen once, and was curious whether the ending would improve. "Ambassador Colin," she said, her voice smooth and measured, translated seamlessly by the implant behind his ear. "You are exactly on time." Colin smiled. "I find punctuality helps distract from other character flaws." One of her advisors made a small choking sound that might have been a laugh. Marveth's lips curved slightly. Tension, Colin noted with relief, could be coaxed into retreat if approached gently, and preferably with humor. Formalities followed, mercifully brief. Titles were exchanged, histories acknowledged, mutual survivals politely implied. Colin spoke of renewed cooperation, shared frontiers, and the importance of remembering past conflicts without reenacting them. He had given versions of this speech before, sometimes to rooms that did not breathe so quietly. Marveth listened without interruption, her gaze steady, her long ears angled forward in a way he had learned signaled focus rather than aggression. So far, so good. When he finished, she inclined her head. "You speak of memory as if it were architecture," she said. "Something built, maintained, sometimes abandoned." "I've found it tends to collapse if ignored," Colin replied, "usually onto someone important." That earned him another almost smile. She gestured with one slender hand. "Then perhaps you should see how we maintain ours." This was not on the schedule. Colin knew that because he had read the schedule 3 times, and once upside down after waking too early, due to nerves and a persistent dream involving alarms, he could never quite reach. Still, curiosity was a professional hazard. He nodded. They walked. The memorial wing branched away from the main court, the light shifting subtly cooler with each step. Panels along the walls displayed images, names, fragments of recorded voices suspended in crystalline lattices. Colin felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the sensation of being in a place where history had been pinned down and labeled, like an insect collection curated by grief. He kept his expression neutral, though he did make a mental note that humans really should adopt softer lighting for these things. It would help. Marveth moved more slowly here. "During the Frontier Wars," she said, "this corridor was unfinished. We did not expect to need it." "Wars have a habit of being very inconsiderate," Colin said. "They never check the blueprints." Her advisor did not laugh this time. Marveth did quietly, then stopped before a recessed alcove where a single image was displayed larger than the rest. A human pilot in flight gear stared out from the past, face smudged with engine grease, eyes steady, mouth set in a way Colin recognized with a sudden, unpleasant familiarity. The room changed. It was not dramatic. No alarms, no gasps, just a stillness that felt heavier than before. Marveth's long ears stiffened, the tips lifting slightly as if straining toward a sound only she could hear. Her gaze moved from the image to Colin, back to the image, then to Colin again, slower this time, as though reality required careful handling. "How can this be?" she said softly. "He's dead." Colin opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Humor, his instincts suggested desperately, would not save him here. He settled for honesty, or at least the portion of it that had been cleared for diplomatic use in his own mind. "I get that a lot," he said weakly. Silence did not fall so much as it was carefully placed, like a delicate object no one trusted themselves to hold. The advisors froze first, their bodies caught between protocol and instinct, eyes flicking from the image to Colin and back again, as if hoping one of the two would politely change. The memorial chamber continued to glow at its measured pace, entirely unimpressed by existential contradictions. Queen Marveth did not move. She stood very still, one hand resting against the edge of the alcove, fingers lightly touching the crystal frame as though grounding herself against it. Her long ears, which moments ago had been angled in relaxed attention, shifted back slightly, not in fear, but in a posture Colin recognized as recalculation. "You resemble him," she said finally. "Not in the way many resemble heroes. Not broadly, precisely." "That's usually when people accuse me of stealing someone's face," Colin replied, then winced internally. Humor was a reflex, and like most reflexes, it did not always wait for permission. Marveth's gaze sharpened, but she did not take offense. Instead, she leaned closer to the image, studying it with renewed intensity. "The scar," she murmured, "below the left eye." Colin lifted a hand without thinking, touching the faint line along his cheek. "I was young," he said. "I believe proximity to an engine under repair made me brave." One of the advisors inhaled sharply. Another muttered something in a dialect Colin's implant hesitated over, then politely declined to translate. Marveth turned fully toward him now. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable, and Colin felt a strange dissociation, as if he were standing beside a version of himself preserved in amber. The photograph showed a man certain of his place in the moment, unaware of how heavily it would echo. "This chamber is restricted," Marveth said, her voice level. "I brought you here because memory should be shared, not hidden." "I did not anticipate it would argue back." "That happens to me a lot," Colin said. "I have a very confrontational existence." She did not smile this time, but something softened in her eyes. She gestured subtly, and the doors to the memorial wing slid shut with a sound like distant rain. "No one else needs to witness this yet," she said. "If this is a deception, it is a bold one. If it is not—" She trailed off, then looked at him again. "Then time itself has behaved irresponsibly." Colin exhaled. "I'd file a complaint if I knew where." They moved to a seating alcove, curved benches grown rather than built, their surfaces warm and faintly responsive. Marveth remained standing for a moment longer, as if sitting might make the situation too real, then finally lowered herself opposite him. The advisors hovered at a respectful distance, their silence now deliberate rather than stunned. "You were declared dead," she said. "Your vessel was destroyed. We recovered debris, fragments of biological matter. Human authorities confirmed the loss." "Yes," Colin said. "They were very thorough about it." Her long ears twitched. "That was not humor." "No," he agreed. "Sorry, occupational hazard." She studied him again, this time not as an anomaly, but as a problem that might be solved if approached carefully enough. "If you are him," she said, "then you are either the most elaborate impersonation ever attempted, or a man who should not exist." "I prefer to think of it as exceeding expectations," Colin said. A pause. Then unexpectedly, Marveth let out a short, incredulous laugh. It surprised her advisors. It surprised Colin. It surprised her, judging by the way she briefly pressed her lips together afterward, as if making sure it had actually happened. "Very well," she said. "Exceed them for me. Explain." Colin leaned back, hands folded, eyes lifting briefly to the ceiling as he organized memories that did not align neatly anymore. "After the convoy engagement," he said slowly, "I wasn't dead. I was inconveniently alive. My vitals were minimal, cellular activity unstable. The recovery team didn't know what to do with me, and neither did command. I was placed into experimental stasis while decisions were made." "Decisions," Marveth repeated. "They took longer than expected," he said. "Longer than me." She absorbed this without interruption, her expression unreadable. "How long?" she asked. "Were you preserved?" 20 years, Colin said. "Give or take a few hours. I slept through most of the debates." One advisor made a small sound that might have been disbelief. Marveth said nothing, but her fingers tightened against the bench. "When I woke," Colin continued, I was informed that the program had been sealed, the incident classified, and that I was, legally speaking, a historical inconvenience. Turns out it's very hard to reinsert someone into a timeline that's already built a monument over them. Marveth glanced toward the image across the room. That monument, she said quietly, was not small. I notice, Colin said. I've been trying not to make eye contact with it. For the first time since entering the chamber, she looked genuinely unsettled. Your death, she said, changed the course of my reign. It shaped my policies. I spoke of you often. I'm flattered, Colin said, then added quickly, and deeply uncomfortable. That earned him a faint smile. It faded just as quickly. If you stand before me alive, she said, then everything I built around your sacrifice is questioned. Colin met her gaze. I didn't survive to undo anything, he said. I survived because someone refused to let me die before paperwork was complete. Her long ears angled forward again, attentive, focused. Then perhaps, she said, the meaning was never in your death at all. He considered that, then shrugged slightly. I've found meaning is surprisingly resilient. It just hates being taken for granted. The chamber remained quiet, but now the silence felt less like shock and more like something new being assembled, piece by careful piece. Marveth dismissed the advisors with a small, precise gesture that carried the weight of habit. They hesitated, then obeyed, retreating to the periphery of the chamber where the walls curved away into quiet translucence. When the doors sealed again, the memorial wing felt less like a public archive and more like a room that had been waiting for this conversation without admitting it. You understand, she said, that what you have told me is insufficient. Colin nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. It means you're still thinking instead of shouting. I do not shout, Marveth replied. Everyone shouts, Colin said gently. Some species just do it internally and develop impressive posture to compensate. Her long ears flicked, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as amusement, wrestling with restraint. She rose and paced slowly, hands clasped behind her back, eyes occasionally drifting toward the image in the alcove, as if checking to see whether it would move on its own. Describe the stasis, she said. Not politically, physically. Colin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Cold, he said. Not temperature cold, time cold. Like the universe paused mid-thought and forgot to unpause me. He hesitated, then added, also very boring. If I had known I'd be unconscious, I would have requested something more dramatic. Marveth stopped pacing. You experienced awareness? Not exactly, more like fragments, dreams without context. Sometimes I was falling, sometimes I was late for something important. That part, I'm told, is universal. She considered this. Our stasis technology arrests cellular entropy by isolating quantum vibration at the submolecular level, she said. Yours achieved this? With several terrifying side effects, Colin said. But yes, apparently my cells were very cooperative. That is not typical. I've always been a people pleaser, he said. This time she did smile briefly, then turned serious again. When you woke, she said, what did they tell you? That I was legally dead, Colin replied, that my name existed in records as a casualty, and that reversing it would raise uncomfortable questions. Also that I should be grateful. Her ears angled back slightly. Grateful. They meant well, he said, in a bureaucratic sense. I had shelter, a new identity, work that didn't involve flying directly into hostile fire. They suggested I consider it a second life. And did you? I tried, Colin said, but it's difficult to start fresh when the past keeps getting statues. Marveth returned to her seat, lowering herself slowly. You are aware, she said, that my first decree as queen cited the sacrifice of a human pilot who chose alien lives over retreat. I'm aware, Colin said. It's in several textbooks. I had to stop reading after chapter 3. It gets a bit flattering. Her gaze was steady. That pilot was you. Yes, and your death became a cornerstone of my refusal to escalate the war. Colin exhaled. I didn't know that at the time, he said. I was busy not dying, but I won't pretend it doesn't matter. She leaned forward now, elbows resting on her knees, mirroring his earlier posture. If the foundation of my philosophy is built on a falsehood, it's not false, Colin interrupted gently. It's incomplete. She paused. Explain. I made the choice, he said. The ship was failing, the convoy couldn't outrun the attackers, and retreat would have left you exposed. I didn't do it expecting a monument. I did it because it was the right thing to do in that moment. He spread his hands slightly. The fact that I didn't stay dead afterward doesn't undo the choice. Her long ears tilted forward, attentive. But the meaning isn't in the outcome, Colin said. It's in the intent. If we only honor sacrifices that succeed in killing the person making them, we're sending a very strange message. She stared at him, then laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. You are remarkably calm for someone dismantling a queen's ideological framework. I had practice, he said. Waking up 20 years late really puts things in perspective. After that, destabilizing interstellar philosophy feels manageable. Marveth rose again, walking to the image. She stood before it for a long moment, her reflection overlapping the preserved face of the pilot. I spoke to him, she said quietly. Not in ritual, in private, when decisions weighed heavily. She turned slightly. I assumed it was foolish. Everyone needs someone who can't interrupt, Colin said. It's why humans invented journals. She nodded faintly. If you are alive, she said, then my grief was misplaced. No, Colin said. It was just early. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, resolve returning. This truth cannot remain contained, she said, but releasing it will cause instability. Truth tends to do that, Colin said. It's very inconsiderate. Her lips curved. You joke. I cope, he corrected. They sat in silence for a moment, the chamber's light pulsing gently around them, as if breathing along with the conversation. Outside, the court waited, unaware that history was quietly renegotiating itself. At the time of your supposed death, Marveth said, I believe peace required symbols. And now? And now, she said slowly, I am faced with a living one, much louder, considerably more inconvenient. Colin smiled, tired but genuine. I do my best. She met his gaze, long ears steady, expression thoughtful. Then perhaps, she said, the next phase of peace will require something more difficult than mourning. What's that? He asked. Living with complexity, she said. He leaned back, considering. I've had some practice, he said, though I'll warn you, I'm terrible at staying legendary. For the first time since he entered the court, Marveth laughed openly, the sound echoing softly through the memorial wing. Not as a dismissal of the past, but as an acknowledgement that it had just become far more complicated than any monument could contain. The decision to leave the memorial wing was made without ceremony, which somehow made it heavier. Marveth deactivated the alcove display with a gesture that felt almost apologetic, and the image of the pilot dissolved into a lattice of light before fading entirely. Colin watched it go with a strange mix of relief and regret, as if a version of himself had finally been allowed to rest, while another was expected to keep talking. They walked side by side through corridors that subtly reconfigured themselves ahead of them, panels shifting with a soft hum as the palace's adaptive architecture responded to Marveth's presence. The technology was elegant, ancient by modern standards, but endlessly refined. Colin found it distracting in the way only very advanced systems could be. If my old apartment had done that, he said, nodding at a wall that had just politely moved out of their way, I might have stayed in it longer. Marveth glanced at him. Your dwellings resist cooperation? They make it a point of pride, he said. Doors especially. She exhaled a small laugh, then grew thoughtful again. The court will notice our absence, she said. Speculation will follow. Speculation always follows, Colin replied. It's very loyal. They entered a private chamber overlooking the upper spires of the city, where vessels drifted along prescribed lanes like patient thoughts. Marveth dismissed the automated attendants before they could offer refreshments that would have required 3 warnings and a waiver. When the doors sealed, the room felt suspended between worlds, neither public nor secret, but something in between. This is where I review policy drafts, she said. It seemed appropriate. I always enjoy being present during historical revisions, Colin said. It makes me feel productive. She sat, then gestured for him to do the same. The truth of your survival, she said, will destabilize factions already eager for an excuse. Some will claim deception, others will accuse me of myth-making. You did myth-make, Colin said gently. You just didn't know the myth was going to file a correction. Her long ears angled back in irritation. They will ask why the symbol mattered more than the man. He considered that. Sometimes symbols are easier, he said. They don't argue. They don't ask uncomfortable questions. They also don't spill tea on important documents, which I regret to say I have done. She looked at him sharply. You spilled? Metaphorically, he assured her. Mostly. Marveth leaned back, studying him with renewed curiosity. You are not what I expected, she said. I hear that a lot, he replied, once from a mirror. She ignored that. You should resent this place, she continued. Resent me. Your death served my reign. Colin folded his hands. I resented a lot of things, he said. At first, waking up to find your own funeral already concluded is disorienting. But resentment requires energy. After a while, you either let it go or it starts making decisions for you. Her gaze softened. And you chose to let it go. I chose to keep breathing, he said. The rest followed. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, just weighted with all the words they were not yet ready to use. Outside, a patrol ship arced gracefully between towers, its hull catching the light in a way that reminded Colin of old training vids. The public will demand certainty, Marveth said. They will ask whether the sacrifice was real. It was, Colin said immediately. They will ask whether peace was built on a lie. It wasn't, he said. It was built on a decision. Mine. Yours, others. Death just made it easier to explain. She nodded slowly. I will need to address them, she said. And when I do, you will stand with me. Colin blinked. Ah, that was not a request, she added. Of course not, he said. Just checking whether I should practice looking heroic or merely confused. Both may be necessary, she said. He smiled despite himself. I should warn you, he said. I'm terrible at fitting into narratives. I have a habit of complicating them. Marveth rose, moving toward the viewport. Then perhaps, she said, it is time our narratives became more honest. She turned to face him, long ears steady, expression resolute but not unkind. For 20 years, she said, I believed peace required a dead hero. And now, Colin asked. And now, she said, I am beginning to suspect it requires a living one willing to be inconvenient. He considered that, then sighed. You realize this means interviews. Yes. Questions. Yes. Statues that don't know where to put their hands. She almost smiled. You will survive. He looked out at the city again, at the future humming quietly beyond the glass. I've already proven that, he said. The room's lights dimmed slightly as the palace shifted into its next cycle, and for the first time since stepping into the court, Colin felt something settle. Not certainty, but direction. Whatever came next would not be simple, or quiet, or comfortable, but it would be real. The announcement did not come with trumpets, which disappointed several people who had very strong opinions about trumpets. Instead, it arrived as a carefully scheduled transmission, broadcast simultaneously across diplomatic channels, civic networks, and the less reputable streams where speculation went to stretch its legs. Colin watched it from a side chamber adjacent to the main court, seated in a chair that had thoughtfully adjusted itself 3 times and still failed to support his lower back. Marveth stood before the council dais, her long ears adorned with ceremonial bands that indicated neither mourning nor celebration. Colin had asked about that earlier. There is no symbol for this, she had said. That seems like a design oversight, he had replied. Now as her image filled the chamber's projection field, her voice steady and precise, Colin felt the peculiar sensation of watching history being revised in real time with him as an uncooperative footnote. She spoke of the frontier wars, of the convoy, of the human pilot whose actions had altered the trajectory of conflict. She acknowledged the memorials, the doctrines, the long years shaped by an absence. Then, without flourish, she said the thing that caused several monitoring systems to spike. He lives. The chamber Colin sat in filled with alerts almost immediately. Data streams flared, reaction metrics bloomed like startled organisms. Somewhere a commentator began shouting enthusiastically about conspiracy, which Colin took as a personal success. Marveth continued, explaining the stasis program, the classification, the failure of transparency. She did not excuse it. She contextualized it, which was much harder and made more enemies. When she gestured for him to step forward, Colin stood, smoothed his jacket, and muttered, "Showtime," to no one in particular. The doors opened, and he walked into the light. The court reacted in waves. Shock first, then confusion, then something approaching offense. He saw it in the way certain delegates leaned back, as if reality had violated personal space. A few stared openly. Others refused to look at him at all, as though denying visual confirmation might restore the old version of events. He raised a hand in a small, awkward wave. "Hello," he said. "I apologize for the inconvenience." That did not help. The questions began immediately. How was this possible? Why was it hidden? Who benefited? Did this invalidate the sacrifice? Did peace rest on a mistake? One particularly enthusiastic representative demanded to know whether Colin intended to sue for unauthorized use of his likeness. "I hadn't considered it," Colin said, "but I do feel the lighting in the memorial was unflattering." Marveth shot him a warning look. He shut up, mostly. As the session stretched on, factions revealed themselves. Some saw opportunity, others betrayal. Extremists on both sides of the old war seized on the revelation as proof that restraint had been naive. The idea that a living man might undermine a perfect tragic symbol seemed to anger them more than the war ever had. During a recess, Colin found himself alone in a quiet corridor, leaning against a wall that obligingly firmed up to support him. A junior attaché approached, eyes wide. "Are you really him?" the attaché asked. "Yes," Colin said. "Though I'm taller now, time dilation does wonders for posture." The attaché nodded slowly, then blurted, "My mother named me after you." Colin winced. "I'm sorry." The attaché laughed, then looked embarrassed. "No, I mean, she believed in peace because of you." Colin felt something tighten in his chest. "Then don't stop," he said. "I'm still in favor." Back in the court, Marveth faced accusation after accusation with remarkable composure. When one counselor claimed her pacifism had been built on a false martyr, she responded calmly. "It was built on a choice," she said. "One I witnessed, one that still stands." She gestured to Colin. "He chose alien lives over retreat then. He chooses dialogue over resentment now. If that is not sufficient, then our problem is not history, but expectation." Colin resisted the urge to bow. He settled for not spilling anything. By the end of the session, nothing was resolved. That, Marveth later told him, meant it had gone better than expected. They met again in the private chamber overlooking the city, both looking slightly worn. Colin collapsed into a chair that finally behaved itself. "Well," he said, "that was invigorating in the way only existential crises can be." Marveth allowed herself a tired smile. "You survive public scrutiny," she said. "Many do not." "I was declared dead once," he said. This felt familiar. She regarded him thoughtfully. "Do you regret coming forward?" He considered the question seriously. "No," he said, "but I regret that my absence was easier than my presence." Her long ears dipped slightly. "Symbols rarely talk back," she said. "They should," Colin replied. "It keeps people honest." Outside, the city lights shifted as evening settled, vessels tracing luminous paths through the sky. Somewhere, arguments continued, opinions hardened, alliances strained. Colin watched it all and felt, for the first time since waking, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not as a ghost, not as a monument, but as a complication that refused to go away. "Just so you know," he said, breaking the silence, "if anyone suggests building a new statue, I vote for something abstract." Marveth actually laughed at that, the sound soft but genuine. "I will keep that in mind," she said. The data archive smelled faintly of ozone and old arguments. Colin had not known that data could smell at all, but Marveth insisted it did, and after an hour among the humming consoles and layered holographic displays, He was inclined to agree. The room sat deep beneath the palace, shielded from interference, and more importantly, from revision. Here, history was not allowed to improve itself. "This is where we keep the original convoy records," Marveth said, gesturing toward a suspended lattice of light that slowly rotated, threads of information weaving in and out of one another. "Unedited, unnarrated. Sounds dangerous," Colin said. "Raw facts have a tendency to upset people." "That is why they are stored underground," she replied. They stood side by side as the archive activated, reconstructing the moment that had followed him like a shadow for 2 decades. The stars reappeared first, sharp and indifferent. Then the convoy, alien vessels clustered in defensive formation, their hulls already scorched. Finally, his ship entered the projection, smaller than he remembered, its damage indicators flaring like embarrassed apologies. Marveth watched without speaking. Her long ears were angled forward, her expression intent but controlled. Colin, on the other hand, felt the familiar urge to narrate, as if explaining might soften the impact. "That's where I should have turned back," he said, pointing. "Protocol suggested it. Protocol is very polite about these things." "And yet you did not," she said. "No," he agreed. "I've always had trouble with polite suggestions." The projection slowed, then shifted perspective, highlighting probability trees branching out from the moment of decision. Thousands of possible outcomes bloomed and collapsed in rapid succession, most of them unpleasant. Colin winced. "I forgot how many ways that could have gone wrong," he said. "It's almost impressive." Marveth studied the data carefully. "In 87% of scenarios," she said, "your intervention resulted in your death." "Overachiever," Colin muttered. "In 12%, she continued, "the convoy was lost." "And the remaining 1%, he asked. "You survived," she said, glancing at him. "Barely." Colin exhaled. "I always did like being exceptional in small, inconvenient ways." They let the projection run, watching the moment his ship absorbed the final strike, shields collapsing, systems failing. The archive did not dramatize it. It simply showed what happened, indifferent to the mythology that had grown around it. "This," Marveth said quietly, "is what I built peace upon. Not your death, but this choice." She paused. "And yet, when I believed you dead, it was easier." "Easier how?" Colin asked. She turned to face him. "A martyr does not complicate policy. He does not disagree. He does not wake up decades later and ask uncomfortable questions." "Those are my favorite kind," Colin said. She smiled faintly, then grew serious again. "I am forced to ask myself whether my pacifism depended on certainty that no one could contradict." Colin considered that, then shook his head. "It depended on courage," he said. "Yours. Mine was already spent." Marveth regarded him steadily. "If you had known you would live," she asked, "would you have chosen differently?" "No," Colin said without hesitation. "I didn't choose to die. I chose to act." The archive dimmed, the moment receding back into stored light. Silence settled, less oppressive than before. They moved to a smaller console, where medical data scrolled past in dense columns. Marveth gestured, isolating the stasis records. "Your preservation," she said, "was imperfect. Cellular drift, neural compression, temporal dissonance." "Ah," Colin said, "that explains the headaches and my sudden inability to remember where I left my shoes." "You did not lose memory?" "Only the useful part," he said. "I still remember every embarrassing thing I said before the war." She actually laughed at that, a brief release of tension that echoed softly through the chamber. "Your species carries trauma strangely," she said. "We practice," he replied. Marveth leaned against the console, her posture less formal now. "I have been accused," she said, "of hiding behind your sacrifice, of using it as a shield against difficult choices." Colin shrugged. "People like simple stories. They like to know who the hero is and when the credits roll." "And now?" "And now," he said, "the hero is late, confused, and very much alive." She studied him thoughtfully. "Does that trouble you?" "Some days," Colin admitted. "It's easier to live up to a legend when you're not around to disappoint anyone." Her long ears dipped slightly, a gesture he had come to recognize as empathy. "You disappoint less than you think," she said. Give it time, he replied. They left the archive together, ascending toward the light of the upper levels. Outside, the city stretched beneath them, alive with movement and quiet defiance of gravity. Ships passed close enough that Colin could see pilots moving behind transparent canopies. Real people making real choices that would never fit neatly into monuments. Marveth stood beside him at the viewport. Peace, she said, was never meant to be comfortable. No, Colin agreed. But it beats the alternatives. She turned to him. When the council meets again, she said, they will demand reassurance that my philosophy still holds. And does it? He asked. She looked back out at the city, long ears steady, posture firm. More than ever, she said, because now it is tested. Colin smiled, feeling something he had not felt in a long time settle into place. Not closure, something better. Well, he said, if you need a living reminder that principles survive contact with reality, I seem to be available. Marveth glanced at him, eyes bright with something like resolve. Then stay, she said, at least until we finish rewriting the future. He considered the city, the court, the complicated, inconvenient path ahead. I've slept through enough history, he said. I'd hate to miss the interesting part. The revised memorial was unveiled without spectacle, which Colin privately appreciated. No dramatic lighting, no soaring music, no attempt to make the moment larger than it already was. The chamber looked much the same as before. Curved walls, soft light. The quiet sense that history had once taken a deep breath here and never fully exhaled. What had changed was the plaque. It no longer said fallen, it said chosen. Colin stood a respectful distance away, hands clasped behind his back, feeling oddly like a guest at his own reintroduction. The image on the wall was still his younger face, grease-smudged and serious, but now a secondary panel hovered beside it, displaying a simple timeline that did not end abruptly. It continued, awkwardly, honestly. Well, he murmured, at least they fixed the lighting. Queen Marveth stood beside him, her long ears adorned with minimal bands, signaling neither triumph nor grief, just acknowledgement. The court was present, along with representatives from human and alien factions who had spent the past weeks arguing themselves into exhaustion. There was a noticeable lack of shouting today. Colin counted that as progress. When Marveth addressed them, her voice carried easily, unamplified, confident without being rigid. She spoke of the frontier wars, of decisions made under pressure, of how narratives simplify what reality insists on complicating. She spoke of peace not as an inheritance from the dead, but as a responsibility of the living. This memorial, she said, no longer commemorates an ending. It commemorates a choice that continues. Several heads turned toward Colin. He resisted the urge to wave. Afterward, as the chamber gradually emptied, Marveth lingered. You are quiet, she observed. I'm trying not to trip over my own legacy, he said. It's been known to be hazardous. She smiled. The council has ratified the revised accords, she said. Joint patrols, shared research initiatives, full disclosure protocols for experimental stasis. Ah, Colin said, my favorite subplot. They insisted, she added dryly. Apparently freezing people and forgetting about them is now considered poor form. He nodded approvingly. We're learning. They walked together toward the exit, passing beneath the arch where the first memorial plaque had once been installed. Colin paused, glancing back one last time. You know, he said, for a while I thought surviving meant I had ruined something important. Marveth stopped as well, turning to face him. And now? And now, he said slowly, I think I just misunderstood what it was important for. Outside, the city hummed with its usual quiet insistence on the future. Ships moved along their lanes, some bearing markings of newly allied fleets. The sky was busy in the way peace often was, full of ordinary motion rather than dramatic interruption. They stood at the viewport where so many of their conversations had ended and begun again. The council has asked what role you intend to take, Marveth said. Colin considered this carefully. He had been considering it for weeks in truth. I don't want my old rank back, he said. That version of me belongs to a different time. But I don't want to disappear either. She waited. I'd like to stay, he said, as a liaison, advisor, professional inconvenience. her long ears angled forward, pleased. You would help us navigate future conflicts. I'm very good at noticing when things are about to go terribly wrong, he said. Usually because I've already done them once. She nodded. Then it is settled. A comfortable silence followed. Not empty, just complete. After a moment, Colin added, one condition. Marveth raised an eyebrow. I am listening. No more statues, he said. If anyone insists, make it abstract. Or better yet, build a park. Something people can actually use. She considered this, then inclined her head. Agreed. They turned back toward the city side by side. Colin felt lighter than he had since waking from stasis, as though the weight he had been carrying was no longer anchored solely to the past. For the first time, his story was not about what had almost ended. It was about what continued.